My name is Arthur, and my son sold my house right from under me. The very roof my wife Margaret and I worked our fingers to the bone for. The walls that hold every memory of my life. He sold it for what he called a business investment. He looked me in the eye, the same eyes I used to see light up when I'd come home from the construction site, and told me my home was a liability, a burden, just like me. I've thought about that moment every day since. What would you do in my place? Listen to my story until the end and tell me, what would you have done? Also, let me know from which city you're listening. I need to know I'm not alone in this. If you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. It all happened on a Tuesday, a day as gray and unforgiving as the look on my son Kevin's face. He showed up unannounced, walking into the living room without even knocking, holding a fancy leather briefcase like he was some big-shot executive visiting a client. He didn't ask how I was. Didn't mention the grandkids. He just stood there, his shadow falling over the faded armchair where Margaret used to sit and knit. He pulled out a stack of papers and laid them on the coffee table, right next to a framed photo of her. "Dad," he said, his voice flat, "we need to be practical. I've made a decision." It was then he reminded me of the power of attorney I'd signed years ago, thinking it was just to help him manage my Social Security checks if I ever got too sick. I never imagined he'd use it as a weapon against me. He started talking about the market, about opportunities that couldn't wait. He said the house was too big for one old man, that the upkeep was a drain, and that the money tied up in these old bricks could be building him a future. A future, he said, that I should be proud to support. I looked around the room, at the scuff marks on the floor, where he and his sister Eleanor learned to walk, at the faint pencil lines on the doorframe marking their height each year. Every corner of this place was a chapter of our lives. His words felt like he was tearing pages out of a book he'd never even bothered to read. He spoke of my home as if it were just an asset on a balance sheet, its only value measured in dollars and cents. My voice felt weak, like it was coming from a long way off. "Kevin," I managed to say, "I promised your mother." On her deathbed, I promised her this house would always be here for you and Eleanor. A safe harbor. I thought that would stop him. I thought the memory of his mother, the woman who adored him, would be enough to reach whatever heart he had left. But he just sighed, an impatient, dismissive sound that cut deeper than any shout. He leaned forward, his eyes cold and hard. "Dad, promises don't pay the bills," he said, and each word was a hammer blow. "This house is a liability, just like your old stories. I need to build a future, not be anchored to your past." That was it. There was no argument left in me. A liability. That's what I was. That's what my home was. The stories of my life, the foundation I'd built for him, were just an anchor holding him back. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just broke. A quiet, deep down kind of breaking that no one can see. I lowered my head and stared at my own hands, the calloused, wrinkled hands that had built this place, and I felt a shame, so heavy, it was hard to breathe. He took my silence as agreement. He packed up his papers, told me the realtor would be in touch, and walked out the door, leaving me alone in a house that was no longer mine. The silence he left behind was louder than any argument we could have ever had. It's funny how a single moment can make you rewind your entire life, searching for the spot where things went wrong. My story didn't start in that living room, with Kevin and his briefcase. It started decades ago, in a little town in rural Ohio you've never heard of, where the dust from the fields coated everything. I was 14 when I started working on the farms, my hands too small for the tools, my back aching before I was even fully grown. I wasn't just earning a few cents for my family. I was trying to build a ladder out of that dust. I swore to myself back then, watching the sun rise over the cornfields, that my children would never know that kind of bone-deep exhaustion. They would have a foundation, something solid under their feet. I moved to the outskirts of Columbus in the 60s, with nothing but a change of clothes and the calluses on my hands. The city was a roaring beast compared to the quiet I was used to, but I found my place in the noise of construction sites. I learned carpentry, the smell of sawdust becoming as familiar as my own breath. There was an honesty to it, a satisfaction in seeing a frame go up, a roof take shape. I wasn't building skyscrapers or fancy mansions. I was building homes for families like the one I hoped to have. I'd put in 10, 12 hours a day, come home covered in grime and feel a sense of pride that no amount of money could buy. I was building something real. Then I met Margaret. She worked at the diner where I'd get my coffee every morning. She had a smile that could make a gray Ohio morning feel like sunshine. and a laugh that cut through all the weariness of the world. She wasn't impressed by big talk or promises. She saw the man behind the work clothes. She saw the dream I was carrying inside me. Marrying her wasn't just starting a family. It was like finally finding the other half of my own soul. She was the one who turned the 4 walls I was building into a home, long before the first nail was even hammered. She was the architect of our joy, the foundation of everything that mattered. We saved every penny. We lived in a tiny apartment, patching our clothes and eating simple meals. Our big date night was a walk in the park. All of it was for the down payment on this piece of land, this very spot. I remember clearing it myself, pulling out rocks and stubborn roots with my bare hands after my regular job was done. Margaret would bring me lemonade in a glass jar, and we'd sit on the dirt and plan where the kitchen window would go so she could watch the kids play. I built this house, board by board. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was our shared hope, our sweat, our future hammered into a physical shape that we could touch. When Kevin was born, I held him in my arms and felt a weight of love so profound it scared me. This tiny person was depending on me for everything. Looking at his small, perfect face, I renewed the promise I'd made to myself in those cornfields. He would have more. He would have an education, opportunities I could only dream of. I saw in him a chance to be better, to go further than I ever could. Every extra shift I took, every weekend I gave up, was for him. I wanted him to have a white-collar life, a life where his mind, not his back, did the heavy lifting. I thought that was the greatest gift a father could give his son. 5 years later, Eleanor came along. She was a different soul from the start. Where Kevin was loud and demanding, Eleanor was quiet and observant. She'd sit with me on the porch for hours, not saying much, just watching me fix a chair or sand a piece of wood. She had her mother's gentle heart and an artist's eye. She didn't ask for much, but her presence was a comfort, a quiet stream running alongside the rushing river of Kevin's ambitions. My love for them was equal, but it was different. With Kevin, I felt a duty to push him forward. With Eleanor, I felt a need to protect her gentle spirit from the world. Our life revolved around them. I remember the smell of the cheap pieing we used for our first Christmas tree, how Margaret made ornaments out of dough because we couldn't afford glass ones. I remember staying up late at the kitchen table, my eyes burning with fatigue, trying to help Kevin with his math homework, a subject that was like a foreign language to me. I'd miss company picnics and nights out with the few friends I had, because overtime paid for new school shoes or a trip to the dentist. These weren't grand gestures. They were the small, invisible bricks you lay day after day to build a family, sacrifices nobody counts but that form the very walls of your life. When Kevin got accepted to college for a business degree, I felt like I'd won the lottery. It was the validation of all those years of hard work. The tuition was a mountain, but Margaret and I looked at each other and knew we'd climb it. I took on side jobs, fixing fences, building decks for neighbors on my only day off. I wanted him to walk onto that campus feeling like he belonged, not like the son of a simple carpenter who was out of his depth. I was so proud of him, so sure that I was giving him the tools to build a better life than mine. I never once thought he might use those tools to dismantle my own. The biggest sacrifice came later. Kevin wanted to get his MBA. He said it was essential, the final step to secure his future. Around the same time, a small plot of land next to my brother's place back home went up for sale. It was my one personal dream. A few acres where I could have a small workshop, maybe grow some vegetables, and just listen to the quiet. It was my one-day plan. Margaret and I talked about it for a long night. We looked at our bank account. It was one or the other. We chose Kevin. I let my dream go without a word. I told myself that his success would be my retirement, my peace. Seeing him succeed was the only dream that mattered. Eleanor, meanwhile, found her own way. She never asked for a dime for college. She got a scholarship to a local art school and worked part-time to pay for her supplies. She was resourceful and independent, never wanting to be a burden. I'd watch her create beautiful things out of clay or paint, and I saw a different kind of wealth in her, something that couldn't be measured in dollars. Our bond was built in the quiet moments, sharing a cup of coffee on the porch, her listening to my stories about the old days. She saw the value in the past, and the things that were made with love and time. She understood what this house meant. Then Margaret got sick. The years that followed were a long, slow goodbye. The house that was once filled with the noise of children became a quiet, sterile space filled with the scent of medicine. I became her nurse, her memory, her hands, when they could no longer hold a fork. Kevin would visit, but he was always restless, checking his watch, his mind on a business deal or a meeting. He saw the illness as an inconvenience, a problem to be managed. Eleanor was the one who would sit with her mother for hours, reading to her, holding her hand, just being present in the sadness. She understood that love isn't about fixing things, but about showing up. On one of her last good days, Margaret pulled me close. Her voice was a whisper, thin as a thread, but her eyes were clear. "Arthur," she said, "promise me, this house, it's our heart. No matter what happens, promise me it will always be here for them, a safe harbor for when the storms come." I squeezed her hand and gave my word. It was the most sacred vow I've ever made. I looked around the room, at the fading photos on the wall, at the life we had built within them, and I promised her that our heart would keep beating right here. I would be its keeper. After she was gone, the silence in this house was deafening. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like her footsteps. I'd found myself talking to her, telling her about my day, as if she were still in her armchair. The house wasn't empty. It was filled with her ghost, with our memories. It was my connection to everything I'd ever loved. Keeping it up was my purpose. Mowing the lawn, fixing the leaky faucet, patching the roof. It wasn't a chore. It was an act of devotion. It was me, keeping my promise to her, keeping our safe harbor ready, even if the ships never seemed to want to come home. But they didn't want to come home. Kevin's visits became obligations, brief and transactional. He and his wife, a woman who looked at my worn furniture with disdain, would stop by on holidays for an hour, their coats never fully off. I remember one Christmas, they sat me at a small table in the kitchen to eat, so the grandkids wouldn't be too loud for me. I sat there, listening to the laughter from the other room, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I was no longer the patriarch, the foundation. I was an old piece of furniture, a relic from a past they were eager to move on from. Eleanor was my lifeline. She'd call every few days, not out of duty, but just to talk. She'd drive down from her small apartment 2 hours away, and we'd spend the day gardening or just sitting on the porch. She never asked for anything. She listened. She remembered. She saw me not as a burden or a liability, but as her father. She knew the story of every scar on my hands, every line on my face. She knew the cost of this house, not the price on some deed, but the cost in years, in sweat, in love. She was the only one who still saw the harbor for what it was. Looking back now, I see it all so clearly. I spent my life building a foundation for my son, giving him every brick I had, even the ones meant for my own dreams. I thought I was giving him a leg up, a head start. I equipped him with the tools of the modern world, a degree, an ambition for profit, a practical mind. But in doing so, I think I forgot to teach him the value of the things you can't put a price on. I taught him how to build a future, and he learned the lesson so well that he decided the first thing he needed to demolish was my past. The shift was slow, like a tide going out so gradually you don't notice the shore is bare until you're standing in a desert of wet sand. It started after Kevin married Susan. She was a woman who smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. In the beginning, she was polite, calling me Mr. Miller, and bringing over store-bought pies that tasted of nothing. But there was a chill that came with her, a sense of appraisal, as if she were walking through the house mentally calculating the value of everything, including me. She had a way of making our simple, comfortable home feel small and outdated, just by the way she'd run a finger over the wooden mantelpiece Margaret had loved so much, a faint look of distaste on her face. Soon Kevin's time wasn't his own anymore. It was our time. "We can't make it for Sunday dinner, Dad. Susan has plans," he'd say over the phone, his voice already distant. The casual drop-in stopped. Visits became scheduled appointments, booked weeks in advance, and they always had a hard stop. "We have to be at a dinner party by 7, Susan would announce as soon as they walked in the door, her coat still on. It was a clear signal. This was a duty, a box to be checked off a list. The easy warmth that once filled these rooms was replaced by a formal, brittle courtesy. I was no longer just Dad. I was an obligation on their busy social calendar. The change wasn't just in their visits. It was in their conversations. They'd talk about stock portfolios, resort vacations, and renovations on their big house in the suburbs. I'd try to tell a story about my time on the construction sites or a memory of their mother, and Kevin would nod absently, his eyes already glazing over. Susan would offer a tight, polite smile and change the subject. "That's nice, Arthur. Kevin, did you tell your father about the new SUV we're looking at?" It was a quiet, constant dismissal. My world, the world that had built his, was no longer relevant. It was an old black and white movie they were being forced to watch in a world of color and high definition. The real turning point, the first time I felt the ground truly shift beneath me, was at Thanksgiving. For 40 years, our house was the heart of the holiday. The smell of Margaret's turkey filled every corner. After she passed, I kept the tradition going. But that year, Kevin called 2 days before. "Dad, we're going to Susan's parents this year. It's just easier, you know. They have more space for the kids." I knew it was a lie. Their house was twice the size of this one. I told him I understood, that it was no problem. I spent that Thanksgiving eating a microwave dinner, the silence of the house so loud it felt like a scream. The empty chair at the head of the table wasn't just empty. It felt like an accusation. Then it was the grandkids. When they were little, they'd run to me, climbing into my lap to hear stories about building houses. I'd make them little wooden toys in my workshop, simple things, but made with love. As they got older, under Susan's influence, they grew hesitant. They'd stand awkwardly in the doorway, coached to say, "Hello, Grandpa," before retreating to their phones. I once overheard Susan telling my granddaughter, "Don't play with that old thing, honey. It's dusty. Grandma Susan will buy you a new tablet." The little wooden bird I'd spent a week carving for her birthday was left on the coffee table when they went home. It was another small, sharp piece of evidence that my world and everything in it was being deemed worthless. The phone calls became a new form of torture. They grew shorter, more perfunctory. "Just checking in, Dad. Everything okay? Good. Gotta run. Big meeting." I could hear the tapping of a keyboard in the background, the divided attention. I started to feel like a nuisance, an interruption in his important life. I stopped telling him about the leaky faucet or the strange noise the furnace was making. I didn't want to give him another reason to see me as a problem, so I learned to be quiet. I learned to say, "Everything's fine, son," even when it wasn't. The emotional distance was growing into a chasm, and I was on one side, he on the other, with no bridge in sight. My 80th birthday arrived on a Wednesday. In my heart, like a fool, I held a small flicker of hope. 80 years is a milestone, isn't it? I thought maybe they'd stop by, even for an hour. Maybe a cake, a card. I woke up that morning and tidied the living room. I put on a clean shirt. I sat in my armchair by the window, and I waited. I watched the mailman come and go. I watched the school bus drop off the neighborhood kids. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in colors that felt like a mockery of the grayness in my chest. The phone never rang. Not once. The silence of that day was a heavy blanket. Each hour that passed was another stitch in a shroud of insignificance. I ate a can of soup for dinner and went to bed before it was fully dark, just to make the day end. The next afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Kevin. 4 words. "Sorry, crazy day, happy bay day. No call, no apology, just a digital afterthought." I stared at that message, at the cold, black letters on the small screen, and I felt a coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the autumn air. I hadn't just been forgotten. I had been deemed not worth remembering. It was a casual cruelty that hurt more than any deliberate blow. That text message was a turning point. It was the moment the quiet hurt began to curdle into a kind of resigned understanding. I wasn't a priority. I wasn't even on the list. Eleanor called, of course. She drove down that weekend with a homemade cake and sat with me for hours, just listening. Her presence was a balm, but it couldn't fully heal the wound Kevin had inflicted. It highlighted the difference between my 2 children. One saw me as a person, the other saw me as a task he had failed to complete on time. The contrast was stark and painful, a clear picture of what I had become in my son's eyes. Then came the Christmas that broke something in me for good. They invited me to their house, a rare occasion. I put on my best sweater, the one Margaret had given me, and drove over, clinging to a fragile hope for connection. When I arrived, the house was buzzing with noise and people. Susan met me at the door with that same brittle smile. "Arthur, so glad you could make it," she said, guiding me not toward the living room where everyone was laughing, but toward the kitchen. "We set up a comfortable spot for you in here. It's so loud out there with the kids, we thought you'd be more comfortable in the quiet." I stood in their gleaming, sterile kitchen, a small table set for one in the corner. Through the doorway I could see the Christmas tree, the pile of presents, my grandchildren playing on the floor. I could hear Kevin's booming laugh as he told a story to a group of his friends. They had put me away. I was the embarrassing old relative to be kept out of sight of their fancy guests. I sat at that small table, a plate of food placed in front of me like an offering to a household god, who was no longer worshipped. I was there, but I wasn't with them. I had never felt so alone in a room full of people. I ate a few bites, the food tasteless in my mouth. The sounds of my family celebrating just a few feet away felt like they were coming from another country. I was an exile in my own bloodline. No one came to check on me. After about an hour of this polite, soul-crushing isolation, I stood up, quietly rinsed my plate in the sink, and walked out the back door. I don't think they even noticed I was gone. I drove home through streets decorated with festive lights, each twinkling bulb a reminder of a warmth I was no longer allowed to feel. That night, I finally understood. I wasn't just being neglected. I was being actively erased. The final, sharpest cut came a few months later. I had fallen asleep in my armchair after lunch. I'm a light sleeper these days, and the sound of their car in the driveway woke me. But I kept my eyes closed, my breathing even. They came in, thinking I was sound asleep. They were talking in the hallway, their voices low but clear in the quiet house. Kevin sounded weary, frustrated. "I just don't know what to do, Susan," he said. "The roof is going to need work soon. The property taxes keep going up. It's a constant drain." He was talking about my home. His home. There was a pause, and then I heard Susan's voice, sharp and thin as a razor's edge. It was a whisper, but it sliced right through me, pinning me to the chair. "Honestly, Kevin," she said, her voice dripping with impatience, "how much longer do we have to carry this dead weight?" Dead weight. She wasn't just talking about the house. The silence that followed her words was heavy, suffocating. Kevin didn't defend me. He didn't argue. He just sighed, a sound of weary agreement. That was the moment. The moment I knew it was over. I lay there, pretending to be asleep, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dead weight, a burden, an anchor. All the words he would later use to my face were born in that whispered conversation. I felt a wave of shame, so profound it was like drowning. I had built this house. I had raised this boy. And in the end, this is what I had become to him. A line item on a balance sheet of his life. An expense he was tired of paying. I kept my eyes shut until I heard the front door close and their car drive away. When I finally opened my eyes, the living room looked different. The light filtering through the windows seemed dimmer. The familiar comfort of the space was gone, replaced by a chilling sense of alienation. I was a ghost in my own life, a tenant in a house that was no longer truly mine, because the love that had built it was gone. I looked at the photograph of Margaret on the mantelpiece, and for the first time, I felt like I had failed her. I had failed to keep our safe harbor from becoming just another piece of property in a portfolio. The betrayal didn't happen on that Tuesday when he came with the papers. That was just the official announcement of a death that had occurred long before. The abandonment had been a slow poisoning, a series of small, daily doses of indifference and disrespect. The forgotten birthdays, the lonely holidays, the whispered insults, they had all done their work. By the time Kevin stood in front of me and called my life's work a liability, he wasn't telling me anything I didn't already know. He was just confirming it. I finally understood the new math of my family. To my son, love was a calculation of profit and loss. Legacy wasn't about memory and sacrifice. It was about assets and upward mobility. And in that cold, hard equation, I was a liability. A dead weight. An old story he was desperate to close the book on. The foundation I had spent my life building for him wasn't something to stand on. It was something to be sold off for parts. The realization didn't bring anger, not then. It brought a deep, hollow calm. The calm of knowing exactly where you stand, even if you're standing on the edge of a cliff. After Kevin left, the silence in the house wasn't just empty, it was heavy with the echo of his words. Dead weight. A liability. For a day or two, I let those words pin me to my armchair. I felt their truth, or at least the truth as he saw it. I was old, I was tired, and my world was shrinking. But then, something else started to stir inside me. A feeling that had been dormant for a long time. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a cold, quiet clarity. He had made his calculation, tallied up my worth, and found it lacking. But there was one asset he had never known about, one investment I'd made that would never show up on any of his spreadsheets. My son, for all his business degrees and talk of the market, was a fool. He saw the world in dollars and cents, in assets and liabilities. He could look at this house and see only property taxes and roof repairs. He could look at his own father and see only a monthly expense. What he could never see, what he was blind to, was the value of things that don't have a price tag. He never understood that the most powerful investments are the ones you make in people. And the biggest investment of my life was a secret I had kept safe for 15 years. A secret I guarded not out of shame, but for protection. It all started about 15 years ago. Eleanor was at her lowest point. Her divorce had left her emotionally and financially shattered. She was working a thankless job at a bookstore, barely making enough to cover rent on her little apartment. The light in her eyes, the creative spark she'd had since she was a little girl, was almost gone. I'd watch her try to put on a brave face during her visits, but I could see the exhaustion behind her smile. She felt like a failure, and worse, she knew her brother saw her as one. A kind, but ultimately unsuccessful person in a world that only respects winners. Kevin's help was always condescending. He'd lecture her about getting a real job or learning a marketable skill. He'd say things like, "Eleanor, you can't just paint and make little clay pots forever. The world doesn't work that way." He saw her talent as a childish hobby, her gentle nature as a weakness. He measured her life against his own yardstick of success. The big house, the fancy car, the important title, and she always came up short. He pitied her, which was somehow worse than his scorn. He never once saw the strength and resilience simmering just beneath the surface of her quiet demeanor. One afternoon, she was sitting right here at this kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of tea, and I saw a flicker of real despair in her eyes. That was the moment I knew I had to do something. Words of encouragement weren't enough. She needed more than a pat on the back. She needed a foundation, a real chance to build something for herself, away from the shadow of her brother's judgment. I had spent my life building things for Kevin, giving him every advantage. Now, it was Eleanor's turn. I decided to give her the one thing I had left that was truly mine. The next morning I went to the bank. Over the years, from side jobs, from fixing a neighbor's porch or building a set of shelves, I had managed to put away a little cash. It was my rainy day fund, the nest egg Margaret and I had agreed I should keep for any real emergency. It wasn't a fortune, but it was everything to me. I closed the account, and the teller handed me an envelope with $10,000 in crisp, $100 bills. Holding it, I felt a tremor of fear, but it was overshadowed by a powerful sense of purpose. This money wasn't for a leaky roof or a doctor's bill. It was for a broken spirit. I drove straight to Eleanor's apartment. I put the envelope on her small kitchen table and slid it towards her. She just stared at it, confused. "Dad, what is this?" she asked, her voice a whisper. I told her it wasn't a loan. It was a gift. It was an investment. I looked her right in the eye and said the words that would change both our lives. "Invest in yourself, sweetheart. You have a talent your brother never saw. Use this to build something that is yours and yours alone. Don't tell him. Don't tell anyone. This is for you." Tears streamed down her face as she opened the envelope. But it wasn't the sight of the money that broke her. It was the faith. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, someone wasn't offering her pity. They were offering her a chance. They were telling her she was worth betting on. We sat there for a long time without speaking. In that silence, we forged a pact. This would be our secret. It was a shield to protect this fragile new beginning from Kevin's cynicism, from his need to control everything, and from the greed that we both knew lurked just beneath his polished, professional surface. We knew, without saying it, why the secrecy was essential. If Kevin had known, he would have scoffed. He would have called me a sentimental old fool for throwing my life savings away on Eleanor's hobbies. He would have insisted on advising her, steering her towards some practical venture he could understand, and in doing so, he would have crushed the very spirit the money was meant to nurture. He would have made it about him. We had to keep this garden safe from the man who only knew how to pave over everything beautiful to build a parking lot. And Eleanor, my quiet, resilient daughter, did not waste a single penny. She didn't go on a shopping spree or take a vacation. She bought a professional-grade kiln, a high-quality laptop, and enrolled in online courses about e-commerce and digital marketing. She worked with a quiet, fierce determination that I had never seen in her before. She spent her nights and weekends not just creating her beautiful handmade goods, but building a real business around them, learning a world of logistics and branding that Kevin thought was his exclusive domain. Her online store started small, a sale here, a sale there, but she poured her heart into it. Every piece she sold was packed with a handwritten note. Her customers weren't just buying an object, they were buying a piece of her story, her artistry. Word of mouth began to spread in those online communities. People were drawn to the authenticity, the quality. The small stream of orders became a steady river. She had found a place where her quiet talent could shout, a marketplace where what Kevin saw as weakness was her greatest strength. Within 5 years, the business had grown beyond anything either of us had ever imagined. She was no longer just a woman selling crafts from her kitchen table. She was the CEO of a thriving company. She had a small team of employees, a dedicated workshop, and orders coming in from all over the world. She had the business acumen that Kevin always bragged about, but hers was tempered with integrity and passion. She had built an empire not on ruthless ambition, but on genuine connection and creativity. Her success was a quiet, beautiful rebellion. Today, my daughter, the one my son still dismisses as poor Eleanor, is a self-made millionaire. If you were to add it all up, her company and investments are worth well over $3 million. But she lives simply. She never bought the mansion or the fancy car. She didn't want Kevin's life. She wanted her own. The secrecy, which started as a shield, became a choice. It kept her world pure, free from the jealousy and entitlement that money so often brings. It allowed her to remain Eleanor the artist, not just Eleanor, the rich woman. The irony is almost too much to bear sometimes. Kevin, in his expensive suit, driving his luxury car, still talks down to her. He offers her financial advice, oblivious to the fact that she could buy and sell him a dozen times over without even noticing. He sees a woman in a simple sweater and jeans and assumes she needs his help. He is so blinded by the superficial trappings of wealth that he cannot see the quiet, solid gold of his own sister's success. He looks at her and sees a failure, never realizing he's looking in a mirror. So when Kevin stood in my living room, delivering his verdict on my life, I felt the ground beneath me crack. But it didn't give way, because beneath the floorboards of this house, beneath the foundations of our family, lay another foundation he knew nothing about. He thought he was seizing my last remaining asset, the crumbling bricks and mortar of my past. He had no idea that my greatest legacy, my most successful venture, was not this house. It was the $10,000 I bet on the daughter he had written off. In that moment, something inside me shifted permanently. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching bruise on my soul. But it was no longer the paralyzing sorrow of a victim. It was the cold, hard resolve of a man who finally understood the game. My son had underestimated me. He saw a simple, uneducated carpenter, a relic from a bygone era. He never imagined that the hands that knew how to frame a house also knew how to build a future in silence. He thought he was closing a book, but he was about to find out there was a final chapter he had never been allowed to read. After the numbness wore off, a different feeling took its place. It was a cold, hard clarity, like the winter air that bites your lungs but makes you see for miles. I wasn't dead weight. I was a man who had built his life with his own 2 hands, and I would not let my son be the one to write the final chapter. I picked up the phone and dialed Eleanor's number. I didn't have to explain much. She had seen the storm gathering for years. When I told her Kevin was selling the house, there was a long silence on the line. But it wasn't a silence of shock. It was the quiet of a mind at work. "Dad," she finally said, her voice steady and clear. "What if the harbor isn't lost? What if it just needs a new captain?" In that moment, we didn't devise a plan for revenge. We created a plan for preservation. It wasn't about hurting Kevin. It was about honoring the promise I made to her mother. It was about saving our heart. Eleanor, my quiet, unassuming daughter, moved with a speed and precision that would have made her brother's head spin. She explained that she would set up a company, a name on a piece of paper that couldn't be traced back to her. This company would make an offer on the house. She knew Kevin's weaknesses better than anyone, his greed and his arrogance. We agreed on a price, slightly above the market value, just enough to be an irresistible bait. A week later, the offer was made through a high-end realtor, all very professional and anonymous. Kevin called me, his voice booming with pride. "Dad, you won't believe it. Some investment firm from out of state wants the house. They offered $20,000 over, asking, no inspection. I told you this was a smart move." I just listened, my heart calm. He was so busy counting his silver that he never thought to look at who was paying for it. He was playing checkers while his sister was playing chess. The day the sale closed was gray and drizzly, just like the day this whole nightmare began. My phone rang. It was Kevin. "It's done, Dad. The money is in the bank. I'll help you find a nice little apartment this weekend. His voice was condescendingly cheerful, the voice of someone who thinks they've just solved a messy problem. "That's fine, son," I said, and hung up. I walked through the empty rooms one last time, my footsteps echoing on the bare wood floors. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a strange sense of peace. I packed a single small suitcase with my clothes, a few photos, and the little wooden bird I had carved for my granddaughter. I wasn't being evicted. I was moving on. My home was safe. My future was secure. It was all taken care of, not by the son I had poured my life into, but by the daughter whose worth he had never been able to see. Before I left, I sat down at the kitchen table, where Margaret and I had shared so many meals, and wrote a letter. My hand didn't shake. The words came easily, like water finding its way downhill. I told him I remembered my promise to his mother, to keep this house a safe harbor. I told him a harbor isn't just wood and nails. It's a place of unconditional love and refuge, something he had forgotten. Then I told him the truth. I explained that the investment firm was a company owned by his sister, Eleanor. The poor failure he pitied had built a life on the very principles he scorned: integrity, passion, and kindness. I told him the money he was so proud of came from the daughter he dismissed, and that she was now the keeper of the family's heart. I wasn't writing to wound him, but to show him the true balance sheet of our family, the one he had never learned how to read. I left the letter on the center of the dining room table, right where he had laid his papers to destroy my life. I placed my old house key on top of it. As I walked out the front door for the last time, I didn't look back. The rain had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds. I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't an old man left with nothing. I was a father whose legacy was safe, protected by the child who understood its true value. Kevin got his money, the thing he valued most. And I got my dignity. I got my peace. Eleanor was waiting for me in her car at the end of the street, ready to take me to my new home. A small apartment she had already prepared for me, close to her. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just the quiet click of a door closing on a past you no longer have to carry.